Look at her. She's not even on the guest list. My sister's voice cut through the crowded ballroom like a knife. A few people turned.
Then a few more. Within seconds, dozens of strangers were staring at me. My family laughed. Not politely. Not awkwardly. The kind of laughter that comes from people who think they've finally been proven right. My father folded his arms across his chest and shook his head. Some things never change. My mother sighed dramatically. She always has to make everything about herself. I stood alone near the entrance of one of the most prestigious military ceremonies in Washington, D.C., while my family watched me like I was some embarrassing stranger who had wandered in off the street. Then everything changed. A 4-star general stepped down from the stage. The room instantly fell silent. Hundreds of people watched him cross the ballroom floor. My sister smiled proudly. She thought he was coming toward her. After all, she had spent the last 6 months telling everyone she was practically military royalty because she was dating a colonel. The general walked right past her. His eyes never left mine. My sister's smile vanished. My father's face tightened. And then the general stopped directly in front of me. He stood perfectly straight. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. Then he saluted. Not casually. Not politely. A full military salute. "Admiral Carter," he said. His voice echoed through the ballroom. "Your seat is in the front row." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming above us. My family's faces drained of color. My sister looked like she might collapse. And for the first time in my life, even my father couldn't speak. 22 years earlier, he had been very different. Or maybe he hadn't. Maybe I had simply been too young to see him clearly. I grew up in a small town outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, where everyone knew everyone else's business, and where family reputation mattered more than almost anything else. My father, Richard Carter, cared deeply about appearances. He wanted success, recognition, admiration. The problem was that he only saw those qualities in one of his daughters, Sarah, my older sister. Sarah was beautiful, outgoing, and naturally gifted at making people like her. Teachers adored her. Neighbors praised her. Relatives constantly compared me to her. "Why can't you be more like Sarah?" I heard that sentence so many times growing up that eventually it became background noise. Sarah made honor roll. Sarah won beauty pageants. Sarah was homecoming queen. Sarah got accepted into a prestigious university. And me, I liked discipline, structure, challenge. While Sarah dreamed about attention, I dreamed about service. I spent afternoons reading military history instead of fashion magazines. I ran before sunrise. I worked harder than anyone around me. Yet somehow that never counted. Whenever I achieved something, it was treated like an inconvenience. When I won a statewide leadership scholarship during high school, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. When Sarah won second place in a local beauty competition, he threw a party. I remember standing in our kitchen afterward. I was 17. My scholarship letter sat folded in my pocket. "Dad," I said quietly. He looked up. "What? Why are you never proud of me?" The question escaped before I could stop it. For a moment he just stared. Then he laughed. Not cruelly. Almost casually. As if the answer were obvious. "Because you've never given me a reason to be." Those words followed me for years. Even now I could hear them clearly. "Because you've never given me a reason to be." I joined the Navy less than a year later. The argument that night was one of the worst fights our family ever had. My father wanted me to stay close to home. My mother wanted me to attend a local college. Sarah called the military a waste of potential. I remember standing in our living room holding enlistment papers while all three of them looked at me like I was making the biggest mistake of my life. "You'll regret this," Sarah said. "No," I replied. "I'll regret staying." My father pointed toward the front door. "Then go." The room went silent. Even my mother looked shocked. But he wasn't finished. "If you walk out that door, don't expect us to care what happens next." I stared at him, waiting, hoping, praying he would take the words back. He never did. So I picked up my duffel bag, opened the front door, and left. No one followed. No one stopped me. No one called. The first few years were the hardest. Boot camp, officer training, deployments, long nights, dangerous assignments, loneliness. While other service members received care packages from home, my mailbox stayed empty. Birthdays passed without phone calls. Promotions came and went. Holidays became just another day on the calendar. At first I kept trying. I sent letters, cards, emails. Most went unanswered. Eventually I stopped. Life moved forward. My career advanced. The military became my family. I learned from extraordinary leaders. I served alongside remarkable men and women. I earned responsibilities I never imagined when I was 18 years old, standing on my parents' porch with a duffel bag. Years turned into decades. My name slowly began carrying weight in rooms my family would never enter. But they didn't know that, because I never told them. When people asked why, I usually gave the same answer. It was easier. The truth was more complicated. Part of me never wanted their approval, but another part still remembered that 17-year-old girl standing in the kitchen, still hoping, still waiting, still wondering what it felt like to make her father proud. 3 weeks before the ceremony in Washington, I received an invitation from the Department of Defense. A 4-star general was receiving one of the nation's highest military honors. Senior officers from every branch would attend. So would members of Congress, defense officials, national leaders, and me. Not as a guest. As one of the ceremony's featured attendees. I accepted immediately. What I didn't expect was discovering that my family would also be there. Sarah's boyfriend, Colonel Daniel Mercer, had received invitations through his command. Sarah had apparently spent months bragging about the event on social media. When I learned that, I considered declining. Not because I was afraid. Because I was tired. Tired of old wounds. Tired of old patterns. Tired of people who had spent decades convincing themselves I was a disappointment. But duty had taught me something important. Sometimes showing up is its own form of courage. So I boarded the flight to Washington. And now I stood near the ballroom entrance while my family laughed at me. The irony almost made me smile. Because none of them knew who I had become. And in just a few minutes, neither would ever be able to forget. For a few seconds after my sister's comment, nobody moved. The ballroom buzzed with conversations, clinking glasses, and polite laughter. But around our little corner near the entrance, everything felt strangely frozen. Sarah folded her arms and tilted her head. "Go ahead," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Tell them your name again." A few people chuckled. The young woman working the registration desk looked uncomfortable. She glanced from Sarah to me, then back to her computer screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said carefully. "Could you repeat your name?" "Emily Carter." Her fingers moved across the keyboard. I already knew what she was going to find. Or rather, what she wasn't going to find. My name wasn't listed in the standard guest registry. Senior flag officers attending the event were processed through a separate security protocol. The registration volunteer had no access to it. But explaining that would have accomplished nothing. Not here. Not with them. The volunteer frowned. "I don't see a listing." Sarah immediately laughed. "There it is." My mother's shoulders relaxed as if a mystery had finally been solved. "I told you." My father shook his head. "Emily, for once in your life, can you stop creating scenes?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of that statement. Creating scenes. For 22 years, I had been doing the exact opposite. I had attended family gatherings quietly. Accepted insults quietly. Accepted exclusion quietly. Accepted disappointment quietly. But in my family's version of reality, my mere presence somehow always became a problem. Sarah stepped closer. She was wearing an expensive emerald dress that probably cost more than my first car. She looked polished, confident, victorious, the way she always looked when she thought she had an audience. "You know what's sad?" she asked. I said nothing. She smiled. "You still haven't figured it out." "Figured out what?" "That nobody wants you around." The words should have hurt. Years ago they would have. But something happens after enough time passes. Old wounds eventually become scars. You remember the pain, but you no longer bleed from it. I simply looked at her. And for a brief moment I noticed something I had never fully appreciated before. Sarah wasn't happy. Not really. Happy people don't spend their lives trying to prove someone else is beneath them. Happy people don't need audiences. They don't need victims. They don't need constant validation. Sarah had spent 22 years competing against a sister who wasn't even playing the game. The realization almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. "Are we done?" I asked calmly. That only irritated her more. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Act like you're above everyone." I nearly smiled. If only she knew. Before she could continue, a voice interrupted. "Sarah." Colonel Daniel Mercer approached from across the room. Tall, athletic, confident. The kind of officer who naturally attracted attention. He had spent over 2 decades in uniform and carried himself accordingly. Unlike Sarah, however, he immediately sensed something was wrong. "What happened?" Sarah pointed toward me. She showed up without an invitation. Daniel glanced at me, then at the registration desk, then back at me. His expression became thoughtful, not hostile, just curious. I recognized the look. Military officers spend years learning how to assess situations before reacting. It was one reason Daniel had risen as far as he had. "Did security stop her?" he asked. "Number." "Did anyone ask her to leave?" "Number." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe we should let the staff handle it." Sarah clearly didn't appreciate that answer. Before she could argue, my father stepped in. "Daniel, you're being polite?" He gestured toward me. "Trust me, this is what Emily does." "What does she do?" "Shows up where she doesn't belong." The sentence landed harder than my father intended. Not because it hurt. Because it revealed something. Daniel's eyes shifted toward him. For the first time he seemed uncomfortable. Good officers pay attention to details. And in that moment my father had revealed far more about himself than about me. The registration volunteer looked increasingly nervous. "I can call a supervisor if you'd like." "Please do," Sarah said quickly. I sighed. This was becoming ridiculous. A supervisor. A security review. An unnecessary spectacle. All because my family couldn't stand the possibility that I belonged in the same room they did. While we waited, my mind drifted backward. Not because I wanted it to. Because memories have a way of appearing when familiar wounds reopen. I remembered my high school graduation. Sarah had received an academic award that year. The family took dozens of photographs. When I graduated from officer candidate school 2 years later, nobody came. I remembered my first promotion. The excitement. The pride. The desire to share the news. I had called home. My mother answered. After less than 3 minutes, she handed the phone to Sarah because she was busy. I remembered Grandma Evelyn, the one person who never treated me like an afterthought. At her funeral, Sarah spent most of the afternoon discussing a real estate deal. When I gave the eulogy, my father later described it as a little dramatic. Funny. Grandma had cried when she learned I made lieutenant. She kept every photograph I ever sent her. Sometimes I think she understood me better than anyone else ever did. The memory tightened something inside my chest. Not painfully. Just enough to remind me that some losses never completely disappear. A movement near the ballroom entrance pulled me back to the present. A security supervisor had arrived. The man approached quickly. Professional. Focused. Sarah smiled. She looked almost excited, as though she were moments away from witnessing my removal. Sir, she said immediately, there's been a misunderstanding. The supervisor nodded, then looked at me. The moment he saw my face, everything changed. His posture straightened. His eyes widened slightly. Recognition. Instant recognition. I knew that look well. He had probably seen my photograph in briefing materials, or during event preparation. Perhaps both. He opened his mouth, then hesitated. A seasoned professional suddenly looked uncertain. Not because he didn't know who I was, because he knew exactly who I was, and he understood that saying it out loud here would create a situation far larger than anyone present realized. Sarah mistook his silence for agreement. Thank you, she said. I knew there had to be some mistake. The supervisor ignored her completely. His attention remained fixed on me. Ma'am, he said carefully. Good evening? The change in his tone was subtle, but not subtle enough. Daniel noticed immediately. I saw it in his eyes. The colonel's expression sharpened. His military instincts had just activated. Because security supervisors did not address random guests that way. Not at events like this, not ever. The supervisor leaned slightly closer. Would you like me to escort you to your seating area? Sarah frowned. What seating area? Nobody answered her. The supervisor was waiting for my response. I glanced around the ballroom. The chandeliers glowed overhead. Military uniforms filled the room. Senior leaders from every branch moved through clusters of guests. The ceremony would begin soon. I could leave now. Avoid the drama. Avoid the confrontation. Avoid everything. Part of me wanted to. Then I looked at my father. For just a second. And I remembered the last thing he said before I left home. You never gave me a reason to be proud. I wasn't here for revenge. I wasn't here for validation. But I was done shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. No, I said. The supervisor nodded. As you wish, ma'am. He stepped back. Sarah stared at him, completely confused. What is happening? Nobody answered. Across the ballroom, movement near the stage caught my attention. A group of senior officers had emerged from behind the curtain. Among them was the evening's guest of honor, a 4-star general, one of the most respected military leaders in the country. He exchanged greetings with several officials, then suddenly stopped. His eyes had locked onto someone across the room. Me. And the moment he recognized me, his entire expression changed. At first, nobody around me noticed. Why would they? The ballroom was enormous. Hundreds of guests filled the space. Conversations continued beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, and waiters moved quietly between clusters of military officers, diplomats, and invited guests. But I noticed, because I knew General Thomas Whitaker, and I knew that look. For nearly 15 years I had worked with him in one capacity or another. Joint commands, strategic briefings, international operations, congressional hearings. He was not an emotional man, not publicly. Yet the moment his eyes found mine across the room, I saw genuine surprise, then warmth, then respect. The kind that cannot be faked. The kind earned over decades. General Whitaker said something to the people standing beside him. None of them understood. At least not yet. Then he started walking, straight toward us. A path naturally opened before him. People moved aside instantly, some out of courtesy, others out of instinct. 4-star generals tend to have that effect. Sarah noticed first. Oh my God, she whispered. Her face lit up. For one ridiculous second, she thought he was coming to greet Daniel. She even adjusted her posture, smoothed her dress, lifted her chin. The confidence returned to her face. I almost felt bad for what was about to happen. Almost. General Whitaker continued walking. Closer, closer, closer. Daniel's expression began changing. Military officers are trained observers. The closer the general came, the more Daniel realized something wasn't adding up. The general wasn't looking at him, wasn't looking at Sarah, wasn't looking at anyone in our group. His eyes were fixed on me. Daniel's face tightened. My father noticed. My mother noticed. Sarah noticed. The atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. The kind of subtle change that happens seconds before a thunderstorm arrives. Then General Whitaker reached us. The entire area seemed to fall silent. Conversations nearby faded. People turned. Curious. Watching. Waiting. The general stopped directly in front of me. For one brief moment nobody moved. Then he smiled. Emily. I returned the smile. Good evening, General. The people around us looked confused. Very confused. Because senior military leaders rarely addressed strangers by their first names. Not in public. Not at events like this. General Whitaker glanced toward the registration desk. Then toward the security supervisor. He immediately understood what had happened. A faint look of amusement crossed his face. Having trouble getting inside? A little. The general chuckled. Several people nearby looked shocked. They probably couldn't remember the last time they'd heard Thomas Whitaker chuckle. Then everything changed. The general stepped back, straightened, and rendered a formal salute. The room froze. My mother gasped. Daniel's eyes widened. My father looked genuinely confused. The security supervisor instantly snapped to attention. Several nearby officers followed. The sound of shoes clicking against the marble floor echoed through the ballroom. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Admiral Carter. The words rang through the silence. Your seat is in the front row. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. It felt as though the entire ballroom had stopped functioning. My sister blinked once, then twice, like her brain was refusing to process what it had just heard. My father's face drained of color. My mother looked at me, then at the general, then back at me again. The expression on her face reminded me of someone staring at a magic trick they couldn't explain. Sarah laughed nervously. It sounded forced, thin, desperate. Number. Nobody answered. She looked at Daniel. Number. Daniel didn't respond either. Because unlike Sarah, he understood military ranks. And unlike Sarah, he knew a 4-star general would never accidentally call someone admiral. Not ever. I slowly returned the salute. The room remained silent. Then General Whitaker gestured toward the front of the ballroom. Come on. I nodded. And together we started walking. That's when the whispers began. Tiny at first, then spreading outward, like ripples in water. Did he say Admiral? Who is she? Carter. Admiral Carter. I know that name. People started pulling out phones, looking up information, searching, verifying. Because in Washington, certain names carry weight. And once someone recognized one of those names, the reaction spread quickly. I heard a woman whisper nearby. Oh my God. A man beside her looked equally stunned. She chairs the Pacific Strategic Council. No way. Yes. Another voice joined in. She testified before Congress last year. The whispers multiplied. Every sentence hit my family like another hammer blow. Because they weren't hearing compliments. They were hearing proof. Proof that they had spent years believing a story that wasn't true. Proof that the daughter they dismissed had built a life they knew absolutely nothing about. As General Whitaker and I moved toward the front, more senior officers approached. A Navy Vice Admiral greeted me first, then a Marine General, then an Air Force Lieutenant General. One after another. Handshakes, smiles, respect, professional familiarity. Every interaction made things worse for my family. Or perhaps better, depending on how you looked at it. When we reached the front section, several reserved seats waited near the stage. The best seats in the ballroom. Not merely close. Important. I took my seat. General Whitaker remained standing beside me. The ceremony had not officially begun yet. People were still arriving. More leaders continued entering the room. Several stopped to greet me. Others nodded respectfully from across the ballroom. One retired admiral crossed half the room just to shake my hand. Good seeing you again, Emily. You too, sir. I caught movement near the back. Sarah. Still standing exactly where I'd left her. She looked frozen. Completely frozen. The smug confidence that had defined her for decades was gone. In its place sat something I had never seen before. Uncertainty. For perhaps the first time in her life, Sarah had lost control of the narrative. For years, she had been the successful sister, the admired daughter, the center of attention. Now the spotlight had shifted, and she didn't know what to do. My father looked worse. Far worse. Because unlike Sarah, he wasn't merely confused. He was remembering. I could see it happening. Every dismissal, every insult, every moment he'd chosen one daughter over the other. All of it returning. One memory at a time. The stage lights brightened. The ceremony was about to begin. An announcer approached the podium. The ballroom gradually settled. Conversations faded. Guests took their seats. My family remained near the back. Not because they wanted to. Because nobody had invited them forward. The irony wasn't lost on me. 22 years earlier, I had been the daughter who didn't belong. The daughter nobody wanted around. The daughter who supposedly never gave her father a reason to be proud. Now I sat in the front row of one of the nation's most important military ceremonies. And my family couldn't even comprehend how it had happened. The announcer adjusted his notes, smiled toward the audience, then began speaking. What came next would leave my family even more stunned than the general's salute. Because they were finally about to hear who I really was. The announcer waited until the ballroom was completely silent. Then he smiled toward the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. His voice carried easily through the room. Around me sat some of the most influential military leaders in the country. 4-star generals, admirals, senior defense officials, members of Congress. People whose decisions affected thousands of lives. And yet, for the first time that evening, none of that felt important. Because my attention kept drifting toward the back of the ballroom. Toward my family. Toward the people who had spent most of my life convinced they knew exactly who I was. The announcer continued. Before we recognize tonight's guest of honor, we'd like to acknowledge several distinguished leaders whose service has shaped our nation. A large screen behind the stage illuminated. Names began appearing. Photographs, accomplishments, brief biographies. The audience applauded politely as each leader was recognized. Then my name appeared. A younger version of me stared back from the screen. Navy dress uniform. Rows of ribbons. A calm expression. The ballroom erupted into applause, not polite applause. Real applause. Warm. Respectful. Sustained. I remained seated, but from the corner of my eye I saw my father physically straighten in his chair. His eyes never left the screen. Neither did Sarah's. The announcer read from prepared remarks. Vice Admiral Emily Carter currently serves as Senior Strategic Advisor to the Department of Defense and has overseen joint operations involving more than 60,000 personnel across multiple international commands. The screen shifted. Images appeared. Military bases, aircraft carriers, joint command centers, official meetings, briefings, international summits. The audience continued applauding. I heard a sharp intake of breath somewhere behind me. My mother. The announcer wasn't finished. Admiral Carter has received numerous commendations for leadership, operational excellence, and distinguished service over a career spanning more than 2 decades. The next slide appeared. A photograph of me standing beside a president during a military ceremony. Then another beside senior NATO officials. Then another from a humanitarian operation overseas. The room remained silent except for the announcer's voice. Her leadership has directly impacted military readiness, international security cooperation, and crisis response operations around the world. The applause returned. Longer this time. Stronger. I glanced back again. My father's face had gone pale. Not embarrassed. Not angry. Pale in the way people become pale when reality suddenly collides with a belief they've carried for years. Because every image on that screen contradicted the story he had told himself about me. The unsuccessful daughter. The difficult daughter. The disappointment. None of those labels fit the woman now being introduced. The announcer eventually moved on. The ceremony continued. Several speakers delivered remarks honoring General Whitaker's career. Stories were shared. Achievements celebrated. The audience listened attentively. Yet during breaks between speeches, people kept approaching my seat. Senior officers, defense officials, retired commanders, men and women I had worked alongside for years. Each greeting seemed to deepen my family's confusion. One retired Marine general stopped to shake my hand. "Still remember that briefing in Okinawa," he said. I laughed. "I'm trying to forget it." He grinned. "We all are." The audience laughed with us. Another officer stopped by. Then another. Then another. At one point, a senator crossed the aisle specifically to speak with me. None of it was intentional. None of it was meant to impress anyone. This was simply my life. The life I had built while my family wasn't paying attention. The realization seemed to be destroying them. Halfway through the ceremony, another speaker approached the podium. A retired admiral. Someone I respected deeply. His prepared remarks focused mostly on General Whitaker. Then, unexpectedly, he shared a story. "One thing people may not know," he said, glancing toward me, "is that some of our most successful leaders never seek recognition." The audience listened. The admiral smiled. "Years ago, during a difficult operational crisis, a young commander quietly solved a problem that prevented a major international incident." A few people chuckled. "She then spent the next 3 months making sure everyone else received credit." More laughter. His eyes settled on me. That commander was Emily Carter. I immediately shook my head. The audience laughed again. But then the admiral's expression softened. "That's who she is." The room applauded. I felt slightly embarrassed. Recognition had never been comfortable for me. Yet something else caught my attention. My father was staring, not at the stage, at me, and there was something in his eyes I had never seen before. Regret. Real regret. The kind that arrives too late. As the ceremony continued, more pieces of the past slowly surfaced. Not publicly. Inside my own mind. Memories. Choices. Sacrifices. Things my family never knew. Like the hospital bill. 6 years earlier, my mother had undergone emergency surgery. I learned about it through a distant relative. Insurance hadn't covered everything. The remaining balance was significant. My parents never knew an anonymous donor paid it. I never told them. There seemed no point. Or the mortgage issue. A decade earlier, my father nearly lost his house after a business investment failed. Someone quietly purchased the debt and restructured the payments. Again anonymously. Again without explanation. And Grandma Evelyn, the one person who had always believed in me. The assisted living expenses she worried about during her final years. The medications. The care. The additional support. Every month funds appeared. No questions asked. No credit requested. No recognition wanted. Because love doesn't keep score. Grandma understood that. Perhaps that's where I learned it. My family never discovered any of this. Not until tonight. Because one of the speakers eventually mentioned it. Not intentionally. Just as part of another story. A story about military families supporting communities. The speaker casually referenced several anonymous charitable contributions connected to me. The details were vague, but specific enough. I saw my mother's expression change first. Then my father's. Then Sarah's. Slowly. Painfully. The pieces began fitting together. The surgery. The mortgage. Grandma. The silence at their table was absolute. No one spoke. No one moved. The truth had finally arrived. Not dramatically. Not through confrontation. Not through revenge. Simply through facts, and facts can be devastating. Especially when they expose decades of wrong assumptions. Near the end of the ceremony, the audience rose for a standing ovation honoring General Whitaker. Hundreds of people stood. Applauded. Celebrated. When the applause finally ended, guests began gathering their belongings. Conversations resumed. People moved toward exits. The formal portion of the evening was over. I remained seated for a moment. Watching. Thinking. Breathing. Then I saw my father stand. His movements looked slower than I remembered. Older. Heavier. The confident certainty that once defined him seemed gone. He looked toward me. Hesitated. Then started walking. For 22 years he had never once crossed a room to reach me. Tonight he did. And somehow that frightened him more than anything else that had happened. The ballroom had begun to empty. Clusters of guests lingered near the exits, exchanging handshakes and final conversations. Military aides collected folders, officers gathered around General Whitaker, staff members quietly started clearing tables. Yet in the middle of all that movement, my attention remained fixed on one thing. My father. He was walking toward me, slowly, as though every step carried the weight of the last 22 years. For most of my life, Richard Carter had been the strongest person in every room he entered. Confident, certain, unshakable. Tonight he looked like a man who no longer trusted his own memories. I stood as he approached. For a second neither of us spoke. The noise of the ballroom faded into the background. My father opened his mouth, closed it again, looked away, then finally managed to say my name. Emily. His voice cracked. Just slightly, but I heard it. The same man who had once ordered me out of his house now seemed unable to find enough strength to complete a sentence. I waited. Eventually he took a slow breath. I don't know where to start. Neither did I. There wasn't a guidebook for moments like this. No military training prepares you for standing face to face with the person whose approval you chased for half your life. My father glanced toward the stage, then back at me. You really are an admiral. I almost smiled. After everything that had happened that evening, that was somehow the thing he chose to say. Yes. His eyes lowered briefly. I didn't know. Number. I really didn't know. I know. Those words seemed to hurt him more than anger would have. Because there was no accusation in them. Only truth. And truth can be difficult to argue with. For a long moment he simply stood there. Then his shoulders sagged. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough to reveal the years. Enough to reveal the regret. Enough to reveal the man behind the pride. I was wrong. The words came out quietly. I wasn't sure I had ever heard my father say them before. Not once during my childhood. Not once during my teenage years. Not once after I left home. Yet here they were. 3 simple words. I was wrong. He looked directly at me. I was wrong about you. Something shifted inside my chest. Not forgiveness. Not anger. Something more complicated. Because I had imagined this moment 1,000 times when I was younger. The apology. The acknowledgement. The admission. Back then I thought it would heal everything. I thought it would erase the years. The loneliness. The rejection. The silence. But standing there now, I realized something important. Time doesn't move backward. Some wounds heal. Others simply become part of who you are. My father swallowed hard. I treated you unfairly. I remained silent. You deserved better. Still I said nothing. His eyes became glassy. I should have been proud of you. That one landed. Not because I needed to hear it anymore. Because part of me had needed it for so long. 22 years. 22 years of trying not to care. 22 years of telling myself his opinion didn't matter. Yet hearing those words still hurt. Not because they arrived. Because they arrived so late. Behind him I noticed my mother approaching. Sarah followed a few steps behind. Neither looked comfortable. My mother's eyes were red. Sarah's confidence was completely gone. For once she looked unsure of herself. The sight was almost surreal. My mother spoke first. Emily? Her voice trembled. I don't know how we missed all of this. I looked at her gently. You weren't looking. The answer wasn't cruel. Just honest. She lowered her head. Because she knew it was true. Sarah stepped forward next. For several seconds she couldn't meet my eyes. The woman who had spent an entire evening mocking me now seemed unable to speak. Finally she forced herself to look up. I'm sorry. The words sounded strange coming from her. Unfamiliar. Fragile. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. I studied her face. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking at my rival. Or my critic. Or the sister who constantly needed to win. I was looking at a deeply insecure woman who had spent most of her life comparing herself to someone she never understood. And honestly, that felt sadder than anything else. I know, I said quietly. Sarah nodded. Tears filled her eyes. Then she stepped back. Nobody knew what else to say. Eventually, my father spoke again. Why didn't you tell us? The question hung between us. Why didn't I tell them? Why didn't I call when I made Admiral? Why didn't I share the awards? The promotions? The achievements? The recognition? The answer came easily, because after a while I stopped believing it would matter. The silence that followed was devastating. My father physically flinched, as though the sentence had struck him. Maybe it had, because deep down he knew exactly how I had reached that conclusion. Years of evidence. Years of indifference. Years of being treated like the lesser daughter. He looked away, unable to hold my gaze. Then he whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. You always mattered. A strange sadness washed over me, because I believed he meant it. I truly did. But believing it now didn't change what happened then. I looked around the ballroom. The ceremony was ending. Staff members were stacking chairs. Guests were leaving. Outside the tall windows, Washington glowed beneath the evening lights. For a moment, I thought about that 18-year-old girl standing on her parents' porch with a duffel bag, terrified, heartbroken, trying not to cry. She had wanted so little. Not medals, not promotions, not prestige, not rank. Just one thing. One simple thing. A father who was proud of her. I looked back at the man standing before me. The years seemed visible on his face now. The mistakes, the regrets, the opportunities he could never reclaim. Then I said the one thing I had carried inside me for more than 2 decades. When I was younger, all I wanted was for you to be proud of me. His eyes filled instantly. But eventually, my voice remained steady. I stopped waiting. The tears finally came. Not from me. From him. My father lowered his head and cried. Quietly. Without excuses. Without arguments. Without defenses. For the first time in my life, he had no words. And somehow that felt like the true ending. Not the promotion. Not the ceremony. Not the applause. This. The silence. The understanding. The truth. A few minutes later, I said goodbye. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just peacefully. As I walked toward the exit, a young naval officer opened the door for me. Good evening, Admiral. Thank you. I stepped outside into the cool Washington air. The city lights stretched across the distance. Cars moved through the streets. Life continued. Behind me, through the glass entrance, I could still see my family standing together. Watching. Thinking. Remembering. For years they believed I was the daughter who never belonged. The daughter who failed. The daughter who disappointed them. Tonight they learned something different. They learned that success doesn't always announce itself. Strength doesn't always demand recognition. And sometimes the person everyone overlooks becomes the person nobody can ignore. Not because she seeks revenge, but because she refuses to let someone else's opinion define her future. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been underestimated by someone you loved? Have you ever spent years proving something not to others, but to yourself? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this remind us that dignity, perseverance, and self-respect often matter far more than recognition. And if you enjoy these kinds of powerful family stories, please subscribe and join us. We share new stories every day, and we'd love to have you on this journey with us. Until next time, take care of yourself and never let anyone else decide your worth.